Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Just want to welcome everyone to Startup Grind Albany. I know I see some new faces out there, so just welcome to those of you who this is your first time, and welcome back to those of you who have been with us before. But I'll tell you just a little bit about Startup Grind before we get started. We are a global startup community located based in California. We are currently in 173 cities, and we are in 67 countries. And basically, we come together to educate, to connect, and to inspire entrepreneurs. We do that through these monthly settings that we have that are taking place all over the world. We also do it with network mixers. We have a few parties during the year, and a major global event that takes place every February in California. Just came back from that. Super fired up. Great things to come for 2015. I got involved with Startup Grind because I saw that there was a slight gap in our entrepreneurial landscape here in the capital region. So we had talking events, we had talking head events, we had networking events, but we really didn't have any events that would allow you to go from the audience to the stage. So what Startup Grind does differently from other events is that we actually tell the story behind the story. So we know if you see someone on stage, typically that they're successful, but you may not know how they got there. So we don't focus just on the successes. We also focus on the obstacles that were overcome to make a great company. Now, I'm excited about our guest tonight. He wouldn't be what considered your typical entrepreneur. His name is Schwartz, and he is a weekly editor from the Albany Business Review. Now, the reason that we're going to be talking to Philip tonight is because he's really taking an innovative pathway through his career. We have a tradition in Startup Grind Albany that I'm going to ask you all to join me in. That's to rest on your feet and help me give a standing ovation to Phil Schwartz from the Albany Business Review. So, Philip, this has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
Kind of excited about having this opportunity to share kind of about what you do. You know, we chatted a little bit earlier and talked about the fact that journalism or media in general is not always seen, perhaps, especially print journalism, not always seen as a entrepreneurial endeavor.
Right, certainly.
But what I found interesting when I looked, kind of learned about you and the different places that you've been, you've had an interesting pathway, and you really have, as I say, found a way to bring innovation to all of your different roles. So I want to talk about a few different things, but I want to start at the beginning and just, let's talk about your childhood. Was there a time, did you think, we hear from some entrepreneurs and they're like, yep, I knew I was going to be a business owner, and some folks that's not the case at all. Talk a little bit about you.
I used to be reluctant to say this, but I didn't really know that I wanted to be a journalist.
Sure.
Some people, I work with a lot of people who grew up just saying, that's the only thing I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to be. And, I grew up not really knowing. I remember in senior in high school, everyone went around the room in the economics class and said, I'm going to study this, I'm going to study that. And I thought, I guess I'm going to study liberal arts until I figure it out. My dad asked me what I wanted to be one time when he was filling out an application for a grant for college, and I just said, I want to be a writer.
Right.
And I thought it was kind of a bold thing to say because I didn't know how you got there. It seemed kind of a daring thing to say because people want you to be a doctor or a teacher or an attorney or something like that, but writer, what do you do to get there?
Right.
A few interesting biographical notes, I guess.
Sure.
I grew up next door to a poet, Milton Moonen, and he was also a painter too, and pretty successful landscape painter. And I think he would come over to the house and read poetry around the table, and so I think that planted a seed early on and led me to fall in love with stories.
So you had an opportunity so even from the beginning, words were very important to you. You had an affinity for words.
Right.
Words were attractive to you. Were there any folks that you would say that were influencers? Did you see folks or have an opportunity to meet anyone in the marketplace that might have been in media, in journalism, that...
there was Milton Moonen. My parents were friends with the editor in the town newspaper in Peekskill, New York, where I grew up. But no, other than that, there wasn't, that's kind of what's interesting is that, my parents were teachers. We didn't really travel in those circles. We weren't really in those worlds. But I remember with the newspaper editor thinking, that seems like a neat job. Like, how do you get there?
Right. So, and that was going to be my next thing. So even at that time, it was almost, you thought, I want to be a writer, sort of something of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you don't really know where you're going to be. I, like you, was not one of those people that kind of knew, I was going to be everything, kind of soup to nuts. But why journalism? So you have this thing that you spoke as a child, you spoke that thing out, and then you kind of, progressed through, and as we look at you now, you are an editor at a very prominent newspaper. But why journalism?
Why journalism? Well, so I go to college. I decide that I'm going to be an English major, and study the liberal arts, and I was very much into that philosophy of, if you study the great works of art, if you study the great works of literature, if you have a great sense of the world and what came before you, and if you were a critical thinker, you can go on to do anything. So, and I thought, hey, I'm going to be a professor. I'm going to go on and get my PhD, and then you talk to your own professors, and they say, I don't know if that's such a good idea.
Right.
And I applied to PhD programs. I got in. I didn't get any funding. What you want to do is you want to get funding for something like that.
Sure.
And it just showed that I just probably wasn't scholar material, and maybe I had talents more suitable to something else.
Right.
So I get into these PhD programs, and there's just no funding, and I'm thinking, do you take on $150,000 in debt to get a PhD, and then go out and then, I don't know how much you know about the market for English professors, but you're lucky to get a job at a community college in Kansas.
Right.
So cost-benefit analysis, at the time I was thinking, I don't care, this is what I'm going to do. So I was talking to someone at Temple University where I got into the PhD program, and I said, I have no fellowships here, I have no scholarships. What can happen? He said, well, you're on the list, you're on the waiting list, and so if someone drops off, you'll move up. And I said, where am I on the waiting list? And he said, you're pretty far down, I got to tell you that. So then, I thought I'd take some time off, regroup, and that's when I found that there was a community newspaper. They were looking for some freelance writers. Sent in my resume, and they called me and they said, we actually have a position open. So that's kind of how I landed in it. And it was, I thought it was an exciting field. It was not. Wasn't. My big fear was that I'd be sitting in some cubicle, chained to my desk all day.
And that's absolutely not what happened.
Right, and looking forward to that 15-minute break. I get 2 15-minute breaks a day, or whatever.
Stop talking about my state employment. But so it's still, even in the midst of not being sure, you really kind of took an innovative. You could have waited, absolutely.
Right.
But that does not seem like that's the hallmark. You're still around words. You decided not to wait, but you took an opportunity that was slightly different from the one that you had initially planned with the educational piece, and so you entered working for this paper, and discovered what were the type of things that you were doing at that initial position.
Well, I was a reporter, so I was going out and covering stories and learning the business and telling stories, and I think that's what it kind of all goes back to, is that notion of storytelling, and that's why I loved studying English in literature, because it was all about storytelling. And now, all these years later, I'm still telling stories. Right.
Which that's the positive way of telling stories, not the negative connotation that sometimes can have. But I say that jokingly because I also am a storyteller. I mean, absolutely coming from a place of we're hardwired for story, just naturally. And you have worked for different types of organizations. You've been a reporter. You've been a critic, music critic. You reviewed books. So you really have had an opportunity to experience a wide variety of media outlets, and it sounds like it does always come back to the story. So how were you able to take, as a child you said, an editor position sounds like that could be interesting, and yet the different types of jobs that you have, you made them all, you didn't take a straight pathway to them. You kind of brought a uniqueness and an innovative, how did that, your way of approaching that? Is that just Philip is wired that way? Or how did you kind of bring that freshness?
Yeah. Well, first let me just step back, and I'm hesitant to say that I'm a newspaper guy, and I don't like to say that I'm a newspaper guy. I work at a newspaper, but we're a media outlet, and I play a lot in the digital world, and I play in the print world.
Sure.
And the print world is still certainly important, but and so much has changed in my 15 years in journalism, and I think if you kind of get at what I think you're asking is that it's a willingness to change and an openness to change, and I've said that it doesn't really matter what you're good at if you're not good at change.
Right.
So and you have to be open to it, and you have to be
sure.
You have to be enthused about it.
Right.
There are a lot of journalists who've kind of been left behind because they didn't have that willingness
to pivot,
to pivot
and move with the change.
Yeah.
I want to just touch back on storytelling for a moment. So we have storytelling that exists within the media arena, but have you found that storytelling is important really in the world, with the economy, with business, with personal lives? How have you seen that?
Well, I reviewed a book called Animal Spirits in 2009. It was right at the height of the meltdown. And George Akerlof and Robert Shiller, they're two Nobel Prize-winning economists, and they wrote this book called Animal Spirits. And there's a chapter on it about stories, and about just reading, just seeing some of the promo materials about this book. They talk about how stories affect the economy, and my first reaction was, how can a story affect the economy? And but they do. The dominant story was one of meltdown, and if you look at prosperous economic times, let's say the .com era.
Sure.
People were attracted to these stories of wild wealth, and they kind of mirrored the stories of the gold rush.
Sure, absolutely.
And so, and I think the media has a way of almost feeding that cycle in some ways, where when times are bad, nobody's telling success stories because they don't fit into the overall national narrative. So that kind of, reading that, and that got me thinking about stories and how stories affect the economy, and how stories really infuse themselves into everything. Right. And once you start thinking about it, you look at everything in terms of stories and storytelling. My brain is thinking, but keep going. So I'll get to.
And I'm kind of thinking too what you were saying about this book, and they were taking the view of how stories can affect the economy, and looking back at media and the influence that, as people, we seem to have an appetite for sensationalism. We seem to crave. The public seems to crave. The more sensational a story is. And again, it's a story, right? So it's still that's coming back to that. How do you find, as one who is really a caretaker of the news, right? If we're looking at journalism as here I have this responsibility to convey this information to the public. How does one go and find the balance? Because I think sometimes we do see where coverage is perhaps skewed.
Yeah, and I think I don't play in that arena, and that's not. And I almost there's certainly certain facets of the broadcast media that play in that arena. Sure. And I play. My career has always been about working for respected news outlets that are
Sure.
objective, that value objectivity, that don't take a hardline
Right.
stance. And I think as consumers of media, we have to be responsible about and question the message and where it comes
Right.
from, and hopefully trust the objective news sources.
Okay. So, in your various careers within media, you have been, quote unquote, the employee, where you were kind of in a position where it was you were answering to someone else, but you've also continuously had positions where you were overseeing others. So, important to be able to pivot, and how do you? But still, I would imagine critically important to be able to focus. So that kind of creates a how do you, I'm coming back to that balance thing again. So, you're kind of answering just for yourself versus now you have other people that you are wanting to, oversee them in a way that gives them the freedom to be able to pivot.
Well, I should mention that in our newsroom and at the Albany Business Review, and we're part of a larger corporate structure. We're one of 40 print markets, and we have 43 overall markets. But in the company and in the Albany Business Review, we want our employees to be entrepreneurial. We want them to take ownership for what they are doing. We also want them to see much bigger than their silo of what they're working in. So if I tell reporters, and I tell new reporters when they come, that you need to be thinking as a reporter, you need to be thinking as an editor, and you have to be thinking as a design editor. Because it's not enough to just write the story. What we need from you is, how is this going to be displayed? What's the photo going to be? What kind of numbers do you have to make a graphic? Instead of telling this story in text, what's an alternative form of storytelling? So we're all kind of entrepreneurs, and ideally, and so if I'm thinking like a reporter and a design editor and an editor, and everyone else is thinking those things, then that collaboration just is going to help us get to where we need to go. And that's that's not from the old school newspaper playbook. That's really from that sounds like a startup to me.
Sure.
And when I first got to the Business Review, we had these cubicles, and you had to stand up to see anybody.
Right.
And we tore them down.
Sure.
And now it's a wide open newsroom, and when we're humming, we're shouting across to each other and saying, hey, I got this story, and do that. Hold off on tweeting that out until we get something on the web, so you can include a link, and okay, so it's on the web. So what are we going to do now for when we funnel this into print? How are we going to treat it differently?
So it sounds as if, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes that have taken place at the Business Review. But as I'm listening to you tell that story, and I'm almost seeing as you're saying, the walls are coming down.
Yeah.
It's creating more of that open entrepreneurial space, not just symbolically, right? But also speaking to what was taking place in the paper, and talk about that shift, because there's been a pretty major shift.
Oh, in terms of our redesign, yeah. So in late 2013, September 27th, 2013, we launched a kind of redefined Business Review where the print product was just vastly different, and it was a months-long process, and it went beyond a redesign. It was redefining what we do and how we do it. We worked with Mario Garcia, who is one of the foremost newspaper designers in the world. He's worked with the Wall Street Journal, leading newspapers in Germany, all over. We were his only North American client at the time, and not just Albany, but all of all the American City Business Journal's papers. So Mario Garcia came in, and we this long process was about changing what the print edition looks like, but also changing what the digital, our approach to digital news. And newspapers have struggled up until the last few years with what do we give away online? What do we hold it back for print? And the New York Times, I remember opening up on a Sunday and you see the story, and like that story was exactly, I saw that at 11 o'clock yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you feed the digital beast? What do you hold back for print? How do you do that? So, but we shifted to a digital first newsroom. We're gonna break news online,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna put everything online first. But how do you do that without cannibalizing the print edition?
Sure.
Because who's going to buy your print product?
Absolutely.
And when I say print too, I mean we know that it's designed so people can read it on their tablet too. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's not just print, but that quote unquote print
Mm-hmm.
experience is different from the digital experience. So you break everything online. You break news online, and then the print is more, or what we call the weekly edition, because
Sure.
that print is kind of an ugly P word. So break everything online, and then print is about a different kind of experience. When you're breaking everything online, it could be transactional news, it's breaking
Mm-hmm.
news, and we think of that as it's a lean forward experience. So you're online at Starbucks and you have a meeting in 10 minutes, you're checking your phone, and there you have your lean forward experience, and it's like, oh goodness, such and such bank was bought out, and then the weekly edition is supposed to be more of a lean back experience where it's more analytical, more long form journalism, and lean back is you're sitting at your breakfast nook on Saturday morning and having your coffee, and you're looking for more of an analytical experience, more of a long form journalism experience.
Right.
So that's how we solved that quandary.
How have you seen? Would you say that the readership has changed? I know that there was a brand design, a kind of a physical redesign last year.
Yeah.
But over the past, I'm not sure how many years, there's been a shift in just the way that the Albany Business Review kind of put out what they put out. So I was wondering, have you seen a shift
in readership and how
Yeah.
in our readers? I think we've seen a shift in who our digital readers are.
That's yeah.
Our digital readers, maybe 5 years ago, the average median income, or the median income of one of our digital readers a few years ago was about $85,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then our print reader was much more. The average median, or the median income was $250,000. So
Mm-hmm.
so we saw that the print reader had more higher household net worth,
Sure.
higher household income. That's shifted. Those boundaries have shifted. So the digital reader looks exactly like the print reader
Okay.
now, and then they've merged too. So
Have-
there's been a lot of merging in that sense.
So merging, but I guess the question that I wonder sometimes is, there seems to be such a shift to all things digital. So have you seen that? I always wonder, how long is the print? The print edition.
We grew our print subscription and our circulation last year.
Okay.
But who knows? I mean, I don't know, and I think at this point it's almost an irrelevant question. Will print stay
Mm-hmm.
around, or will it not? And I think the question, and this is from my standpoint, because our newsroom is unlike a lot of other newsrooms,
Okay.
in that we've added staff in my time there.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't taken away.
Right.
So will print go away? I think that's almost like a question that's just like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, but 5 years ago, the concern with all these downsizing in these newsrooms was, will journalism go away?
Sure.
And I think what we're seeing is that journalism is here to stay,
Mm-hmm.
and people have come to realize that you have to, quality journalism you have to pay for.
Sure.
You're not going to have quality journalism by paying bloggers $15 a post. You're going to have quality journalism by
Right.
providing middle-class salaries and health insurance and 401k benefits. And I think a lot of news organizations, good news organizations, recognize that and are investing in the content, because the content is what people want.
Right. How do you keep things fresh in the newsroom? How do you? I would imagine that the pace is. I don't know, maybe fresh isn't. Keep it new. Keep it innovative.
Yeah.
How are you? Not necessarily you, the kind of collective you. How does that happen?
I think that there has to be in any organization, and whoever you are, whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader or what have you, there has to be, because every day there's transactional conversations.
Sure.
There's, I need this, I need this, I need that, and there always has to be the pullback where you have these big overarching what's it mean kind of conversations, and those conversations have to happen on a regular basis, and they have to happen all the time. I once saw a entrepreneur in the Albany area who was well known, and he was talking about helicopter leadership, and where you're up in the helicopter and you see you look down, you see the fires, you land it, you put out the fires, you do what has to be done on the ground, but then you always have to get back up in the helicopter, go up and look down and see things from above.
Right.
And I think if you're having those kind of what's it mean kind of conversations, and this just doesn't apply to journalism.
Sure.
Then people are going to be still energized,
Right.
because it's not about transactions. It's not about I filed this story and that and I set up this photograph and so.
So a lot of times it's about relationship, and I'm glad you said that it's not just about journalism, because part of what I wanted this conversation to really kind of expose or to uncover is that it really doesn't matter where you are. You can be a student, you can be a person that's at home, you can be anywhere. I think sometimes we think of an entrepreneur as it has to be this thing or this entity, and it has to look a certain way. But really, that one of the to me, entrepreneurship is about passion, and it's about innovation, and it's about the willingness to pivot and knowing when to pivot. And so I was very much struck by the fact that is something that can be brought into anything, and it really sounds like through your career that is something that you brought into play, if not entrepreneurial per se, but really bringing innovation. We've talked a lot about the Business Review, but even when you were a music critic, if we talk about pivoting, there was a certain point where you realized, I love this thing, and yet there needs to be a change. So talk about how one ascertains, and I think it's global. It's not just in a job, when it's time to make that change.
Yeah. When I worked at the Daily Gazette, which is a daily newspaper based in Schenectady, I went there as a business reporter at first. And there was an opening on the Life and Arts desk for a music writer, and there was an opportunity to take that and do more long-form journalism as well. And that's what I wanted to do, is have the opportunity to write longer pieces, more in-depth pieces, and tell stories. It was about the storytelling.
Sure.
So kind of a daily reporter on the business desk. I was getting to write some Sunday stories, but it was a lot of covering breaking news, writing short stories, but I wanted to tell human stories, and I saw that as an opportunity to do that. So I'm just keep on firing questions at me. A lot of if one were to look at your resume, we see a lot of reporting and we see a lot of writing, and then there was a shift where you kind of went into just the music piece of it. So still writing, but really different from your beat on the street type reporting. Right.
So how was that, similar or?
Yeah, I know. I was going to say that one of the great challenges of writing for a Life and Arts desk and writing about music, and it was pop and rock music and some jazz and blues. And one of the challenges for that is that people don't have to read your stuff. It's kind of people are reading. They have to be informed about the hard news of the day. They don't really have to read this feature story on George Carlin.
Sure.
And if you wrote that story, you better make it good, and you better make it. So being able to tell that narrative was what was intriguing to me, and really focusing on the writing, and because and getting people to want to read to the end, and writing it in such a style that people have to demand to know what's next, and that's what great writing is. It's not transactional. I am reading this, and I am so curious about what comes next. How does this story unfold? So that was really my goal when I was writing about music and so on. And I don't know if I really answered the question.
No, that's fine. So it sounds as if even the word that keeps coming to mind for me is relational. So you're saying it's not, to me, the opposite of transactional is relational, right? A transaction, if we're looking at it like this is a thing that's, set it and forget it, right? Ronco, it's a done deal. As opposed to, you are really, through your writing, like you say, you need to engage that reader. So you are building a relationship, almost, like a blind date, right? Because you don't know who the reader's going to be, but you need to engage them.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine covering concerts and that sort of thing might have given you not your typical 9 to 5 hours. So how do you find balance in a situation like that in terms of family and work life and the other vocations?
I tell this story, and because people say, well, you had this really cool job covering music, and you were going to concerts and you're interviewing all these famous people, and that was so cool. And then you went and became a business editor, and I talk about balance. The morning that I found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child, she's sitting right over there, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. And I was like, that's great. We hugged, we kissed, we jumped up and down, this is amazing. And it was like, gotta go cover a jam band festival. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I had to drive out to this jam band festival in the middle of the country, and I literally worked from 10 a.m. around the clock, 10 a.m. Saturday to like 3:30 a.m. Sunday. It was like an 18-hour day. And as I'm covering this jam band festival, this kind of big moment in my life, I'm thinking, this might not be the right job for a young dad. So
right. So and again, speaking to the piece about the balance, right? And so that was a pivot for you. That was a huge pivot.
Sure.
So pivots sometimes are done because what's happening is unsustainable, but sometimes a pivot comes simply because it's no longer it doesn't work. It doesn't work the same way, or it's a good thing because that was a good thing, but it wasn't the expedient thing for you.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't just about becoming a dad.
Sure.
And that was part of it. And you want to have balance. You
Sure.
want to be there for your kids. But it was also this thought that if I'm a 50-year-old music writer, I mean, are people going to take me seriously? and that's not to say. I mean, there's plenty of 50-year-old music writers who I take seriously and admire and so on. But I also thought, with all the cuts happening in journalism, a music writer might be a luxury that you couldn't. That a newspaper would say that this is a luxury we can't afford. So it was about. It was about making a pivot for those reasons.
Absolutely.
Too. And
absolutely.
And I'm glad I did it. It was a great move, and
and
I got in a really great dynamic newsroom with really strong leadership.
Sure.
In a great company.
Sure. Now, again, one of the things that makes Startup Grind different is we talk about not just the successes, which we've been talking about, but also the challenges and obstacles that have been overcome. And so those could be business obstacles, they could be personal obstacles, they could be that. Very often there's that one thing that you look at and you're like, oh, here's this thing, and at the moment it may seem like a really bad thing. But in retrospect, you're kind of like, you know what? As I look and I see that really kind of added value in one way or another. Talk about that a bit.
As you're talking, it just this kind of comes to mind, and one of the things that I've said over and over again is the word storytelling. And you talk about a failure. I remember and it doesn't have to do with a journalistic failure,
Sure.
but more of a job search failure. I was someone had gotten a hold of my resume. She called me at I think she may have emailed me at 8 in the morning or something. Can you talk with me today? And I said, send it back. Sure. What time? 2:30. I'll make it happen. So she wanted to talk to me about my resume and an opportunity. And she called me up, and I bombed the interview. It was like awful. I had no idea what to say. And she was asking me, and part of it is because it was just contacting me out of the blue, and I didn't
Sure.
I didn't know anything about the job and so on. So she was asking me all these situational questions, and I just was caught flat-footed. And later I realized I didn't have any stories to tell her. There's an important for stories
Sure,
and to tell these stories. And I think for a big part of your audience are these young entrepreneurs and people who have ideas for companies, and then I would urge anybody who's starting a company to have a story.
Sure.
What's your story? What's your story as an individual, and what's your story as a company? Every company has a story, whether they know it or not, and they tell that story and they project that to the outside world. And sometimes it's not a story of success.
Right.
So
Sure.
what is that? What's your individual story? Is it a story of success? What's the story your company tells? What does it tell internally, and what does it tell externally?
Absolutely.
And no matter as if you're starting a company and as it grows, pay attention to the story you're telling.
Sure.
And in the Albany newsroom, it's this little quirk for us. So we're compared to all the other American City Business Journal's markets.
Sure.
So and Albany has kind of since our redesign, we've kind of emerged as one of the papers to watch, one of the markets to watch, because we're not just a paper. We've emerged as this market to watch, and the story we tell ourselves internally, and this is not consciously, and we're not just saying this is the story, but that we're these scrappy underdogs. And that we're little old Albany, and Albany is one of the smaller markets. So we're in Boston, we're in Seattle, Denver, and we're digital market in Chicago, and we're in New York. So we're scrappy little Albany, and we're rising up to the heap. So we have the story of being this scrappy underdog, and one of the things that my boss, the editor-in-chief, Mike Hendricks, says. He says, we're the worst. We're the worst in the change. We're number 40. We're number 40. And we joke about it. And it's funny because being that underdog really propels us.
Sure.
And knowing that not resting on our laurels and always wanting to be better. So it's like, well, we got to be better because we're number 40. We're not, okay, maybe we're 39 today.
Right.
And it's a joke. It's a tongue-in-cheek joke.
Sure.
And we all get the joke. I mean, if you walked in, you'd be like, gosh, these people are awful.
Sure. Well, and again, talking about the story and companies and businesses, how it's important. Stories are absolutely important. Because you're either telling them or you're not telling them, but they're still being told, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it's important to know that story, especially with businesses when you find that the story that the business thinks they're telling, and that's not the same story that they're being perceived as, causes a huge disconnect.
Sure.
You're wondering why things aren't working, and I think that kind of being congruent is critical. Not just in business, but personally, in school, because when those two things don't match up, how you perceive yourself, there may need to be a tweak that's done. There, like you say, if the story's not it's not matched up.
Right. Yeah. The story. It doesn't matter how much storytelling you do. If it's not based on reality, it's just going to fall flat. So you have as an individual, as a business, you have to have the goods to back up the story. And if you're telling your employees, hey, this is who we are, and your employees are saying, oh goodness, that's not how I see it. Then you got a problem.
I'm going to leave some time for folks to ask questions, but. Writing, as a writer, I understand and appreciate writing is a creative endeavor, right? It always is. Even if you're writing, the most mundane or dry business, it is a creative practice. Are there any things that you do whether you're writing for yourself, or writing for work. Any rituals or ways that you have to kind of get yourself in a place where, some people do music, some people do. Is there anything you do?
Well, first I freak out.
Okay,
and
that was a good one.
I'm never going to be able to write a headline again
Sure.
or anything like that.
Sure.
There's something about the blank screen or
Yes.
unshaped project that's very intimidating. But
Indeed.
I think you just have to, I just jump in and I
Right.
kind of work at the edges.
Right.
And I think it's individual.
But I'm going to stop you there, because what you just said was really important. And we had a conversation about stories, and people don't know that they have a great story. And sometimes you're so close to a thing. What you just said is a writing technique. You said, I write from the edges.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes I think, even as writers or non-writers may think, this is page 1 and line 1, and I've got to write in this very linear fashion. But it can be extraordinarily helpful to write around the edges. So you just kind of let it go.
Right. Yeah.
And then you look at it and say, well, no, that kind of goes there.
Right.
So that was really super helpful. What would you share with folks that are either interested in journalism, interested in being more innovative? Are there books that you would recommend or resources? Some things that have just you found to be helpful.
So for journal, the Poynter Institute, they have great robust website, and there's all kinds of wonderful tips there. Get back to me on that one. I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I'm not sure. And I don't go toward traditional sources to.
Sure.
To
Just things that can look. Okay, that sounds good. Like I said, I want to leave some space for some time for questions. Did anyone have questions that they wanted to ask? I'm going to go with Dan.
Sure. I was just wondering, being now your role has changed over a period of time. You were talking about with some of the staff, you have to give them the 10,000 foot view so they see the whole big picture, all different mediums they got to work with. And so your role almost moves into management and leadership. How do you? My question is two questions. Is how do you keep your passion for why you got into what you're doing? And are you working on anything outside of work that's personal projects?
I'm going to ask you to just repeat the question just for the mic. So I think the question was, how do you keep your passion?
Yeah.
And is there anything that you're doing outside of work to keep you engaged and energized?
Yeah. We have some young reporters on staff, and working with them is it's great because they're young, and there's
awesome.
a lot of knowledge that I feel like I've gotten to the point in my career where I can pass some of that knowledge along. So that keeps me really energized. Outside of work, I am I start to write things and never finish. I have 2 kids at home, so 7 and 2.5. Those writing projects, I wish there was more time for, and it's kind of one of those things that maybe someday. But and I recharge my batteries by just kind of being an outdoors guy. I'm a big cyclist. I cycle to work a lot too, so that kind of keeps me charged up. So
Cool.
Good question. Thanks, Dan.
Anyone else?
As a covering sort of Tech Valley, the entrepreneurial side of this small, actually still old and small town or group of towns, 39 or 40 or whatever. What is your take on the tech prospects for this area?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question. So the question is, considering coverage of the Tech Valley area, what's your impression of the Tech Valley?
Yeah, I think what we saw 10 years ago was kind of a robust, almost startup culture that MapInfo came out of, Vicarious Visions came out of eTransmedia, companies like that. I think for a while we saw that startup energy kind of die down, probably for a number of reasons. And then we saw the Global Foundries, what's now SUNY Polytechnic Institute, kind of take over, and then we weren't really seeing the startups kind of spinning out of them. But I'm sensing a shift and a change that the universities are starting to again crank out a lot of startups. I was at an event last week at Revolution Hall in Troy.
Was it the same
We were
event?
there,
Yeah.
and it was real. I thought there was great energy there, and the people who presented, they had great ideas. They made great presentations. How do you get that to market? I don't know. Do we have the infrastructure to get these small startups to the next step into commercialization, to profitability? I feel like it's almost like a wait and see, but I like what I see. I like the buzz that's out there, and it's energizing. And I also think that you speak to the universities, and these students are all coming out with all these great ideas, and what a great time for them to play in this sandbox, as all the barriers of entry to starting a business have seemed to fall down with the advent of the digital age.
If I can just add to that, I'll be with you in just one second, is that absolutely we are seeing some things out of the university. I think that's always been in place. But there are other engines that are pushing the startup movement. Startup Grind certainly is one that is not affiliated with universities. And then there are also some of the accelerators that are around. I know there certainly is an accelerator that's being built and launched in our area by Infocus Brands, the Infocus Brand Economic Development Acceleration Lab. So absolutely there are university-based things that are happening, but it's awesome that we don't have to look solely to the universities to get that thrust of startup momentum.
What were one of your darkest moments as an entrepreneur? How'd you overcome that?
What was one of your darkest moments as an entrepreneur, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I don't know. I hate to sit up here and be all sunny and rosy, but I can't think of any real dark moments. I think starting out early in my career was frustrating. And like I said, I came out of college, I had an English degree. What do you do with an English degree? And I think those early years where you really had to pay your dues in journalism, and the pay is low and the hours are long, it's a tough learning curve. So I think those early years, I would have to say, were tough, and I still keep in contact with some of the people from those days, and we look back to them with fondness because and we shared something special there. And I think for a lot of people who are liberal arts majors, they come out into the world. And you hear all this stuff like, employers say, we need critical thinking, we need creativity, and then it's like, hey, I majored in philosophy, there's a disconnect there between what employers say they want and these poor liberal arts majors
and what they're really coming out.
If I could sneak in two questions. Number one, I'm curious about what your feelings are towards the appetite for business ownership in Albany, but I'm sure a lot of people are curious about your thoughts on the whole Brian Williams situation with NBC and truth in the media, and you can have MSNBC and Fox News covering the same story from two completely different perspectives. So I'm curious about your thoughts.
So we've got two. So we've got the appetite for business in Albany, and then the Brian Williams story, and you take your choice.
Right. Okay, we'll try to get to everything there. I think the appetite for business, when I first moved to Albany in 1999, it seemed like a real state government town. And I think that all these years, 15, 16 years later, that has changed tremendously. And I don't know if that's because my perspective has changed because of where I am. But I do see that some of that reliance on state government has changed. And if you look at data, the data will back that up too, that we're a more diverse economy. I still think we have a long way to go. But I think there's a lot more opportunity here than there was back then. Brian Williams, I think he may have come from more of a celebrity culture than a journalism culture. I had heard that he had his dream job was to host the Tonight Show. So that might explain why he, came out and wanted to kind of blow up this sensational story. Someone had said, if you've really been in a firefight, you're not going to want to talk about it the way he talked about it. And I think Tom Brokaw, I just from what I've read, what I've heard, he was kind of behind the scenes, kind of trying to hold that whole newsroom together. And I think there was a rift between Tom Brokaw, who came from really that traditional journalism background and not from the celebrity culture background. As for the slant in broadcast media, keep reading the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Albany Business Review, because the values of objectivity still live on in those outlets from where I'm sitting.
In the back.
Yes, storytelling is important to entrepreneurs to attract customers, to attract employees, to attract capital.
Yeah.
What do you tell your journalists is important keys to telling a good story?
So I'm just going to repeat the question. I'm
Right.
sorry. I know
Certainly,
I always kept you, and
please.
you're like, so storytelling is important to entrepreneurism and to entrepreneurs. So how are you prepping your reporters?
Yeah. I think we want to avoid jargon at all costs. I think we want to write conversationally, and try. And short sentences never hurt either. 28-word sentences is a good barometer. I think mixing sentence structure, mixing sentence lengths always leads to good writing. But I think if the message for entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, you could be caught up in the technology, but what's the story behind it? What's the human need that you're trying to solve? And how are you going to get there? Get out of the jargon and realize that you're talking to different audiences too, and recognize when you're talking to different audiences.
You're talking to people.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're talking to a tech person, you can be up here, but when you're talking to an English major, sorry,
Sure.
I got
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Bring it down to my level. Tell me a story.
In the back.
Do you see yourself giving back to aspiring student entrepreneurs in the near future so they don't go through the same struggles and dark times that they had before, so you can guide them in the right direction?
Yeah, I think... Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I jump in.
Yes.
No, do you see yourself giving back to student entrepreneurs so they don't have a dark journey?
Yeah, I think that everyone, once they get to a certain point in their career, they want to give back. And I think when you're young, and one of the mistakes I may have made was not seeking out a mentor early. And I think when you're young and you're trying to establish yourself, you need that contact. And if I had advice to give to a young student entrepreneur, it would be make those connections. If someone gets an email in their inbox and it says, "Hey, I really admire you because you're really successful and you built this great company. Can we get together and have a cup of coffee? I'd love to just talk shop with you." That person's gonna want to sit down with you. I think, at least I would. I mean, I'm all for the flattery. Bring it on.
It really, and we didn't really get a chance to get into it too deeply, but it was something. Obviously, it's important is networking, and that kind of speaks to what you were saying, that making those connections, being at settings like this at Startup Tech Valley, opportunities where you can come into contact and
get out there and network, but also then don't let it stop there. Prod people to get in front of them. Coffee's great. Sit down and have a cup of coffee. And,
relational.
It's all relational. Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? I think then that we are at a wrap.
There's someone back here.
Oh,
I was just wondering who your favorite writer was and why, and if you still turn to them for inspiration.
Yeah, I would say if I had to name my favorite fiction writer, it would be Alice Munro. She's a Canadian writer. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature recently. She recently said that she was going to retire from writing. She's late 70s, early 80s. I don't know what it is about her work. I don't know. It's not subject matter. It's not style. It's something in between that there's it's just great writing, and there's kind of cosmic connection there that I can't explain. It's and there's a lot of people who feel like I do too. Another person that another novelist is James Salter, who kind of a writer's writer, and not many people know who he is. He wrote a novel in the mid-'70s called Light Years, and it sold, I think, 5,000 copies. But that guy can write a sentence. Yeah. And who cares if he hasn't sold books?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you, Philip,
Thank you.
for really
This is a lot
being
of
with
fun.
us. Thanks to Dan and all the great folks at Overit, all my Overit people that make it. We couldn't do this without you, and of course my amazing video crew from Limitless Imprints. Thank you for being here, and all my mentors and my sponsors. I've got some sponsors in the house from InFocus Brand, so just thank you very much for coming. And on the next week, normally we only have one event, but next week we're actually going to have a rebroadcast of Guy Kawasaki. If you know who Guy Kawasaki is, he's one of the leading SEO experts in the world. I think he's got like 100 million followers. Our CEO will be interviewing him at Google headquarters at 9:30 in the morning, and we are going to take that live stream and rebroadcast that back. So we're going to be back here at 6 p.m. on the 18th. Invite you all to come back. If you go to the website, you can get all that information. But thanks so much for being here with us tonight.